Okay, import quota. An import quota is a restriction on the quantity of a good that may be imported. Tariff is a restriction on the price of a good that may be imported. Right? So import quota is a quantity, import quantity control instead of price control. Okay? In that sense, import quota is different from tariff. But the result is very similar. Okay? This restriction is a quantity restriction is usually enforced by issuing license or quota rights. Right? License or quota rights. A binding import quota will push up the price of the import because the quantity demanded will exceed the quantity supplied by home producers and from imports. Now look at this one. That is a tariff case. At free trade case, at this PW, total demand, domestic demand is 200, right? And domestic production is 100, at PW 100, and total demand is 200. The gap between the two is imported from overseas and supplied at domestic market. That was 100, right? Import was 100. Can you understand? So same figure. But this time, no imposition of tariff, right? Instead of this imposition of tariff or price control, just government set maximum importation is 70, right? That is measure. Korea can import maximum 70 tons of beef, for example, right? Then what happened? At world price, same. This one at world price. Total demand, domestic consumption is 200, domestic production is 100, and import supply was 100, right? But suddenly, government declared that maximum import is 70 tons. That is binding import. Just 70. Then what happened? That is 70 instead of 100. Then what happened? Domestic demand greater than total supply. Domestic supply plus import supply. Supply, demand greater than supply. Then what happened? What happened? Price increase. Right? Price increase. Instead of no price control by government. Then price increase. So now price is here. Right? Price increase. So price increase from here to here. Right? Because of disequilibrium in demand and supply, right? At this price increase, then domestic demand should be smaller than original one. Price increase, then consumers' demand decrease. That is, for example, 195, right? At this earlier increased price, domestic production higher than 100, right? Price increase, then domestic producers supply more. That is, for example, 105, right? And the maximum import is 70. Then what happened? 105 plus 70. So total supply is 175, right? But demand 195. Still, demand larger than total supply. Then what happened? Price increase again. Then what happened? Domestic demand decrease again. From 100 decrease again. So domestic demand is, for example, 190. Right? Price increase. So domestic production increase a little. Then 110. And the maximum imports is 70 still. Then what happened? Still, total demand greater than total supply, right? Then price increase until equilibrium restored, right? So now, anyway, price of quota, equilibrium price of quota is here. At this price, what happened? Right? Total demand, domestic demand is 180. Domestic production is 110. Maximum import of import supply 70, so equal. Right? Reaching at this price automatically. Governments just set maximum importation amount. Then, functions of market, demand and supply, right? Price automatically increase to restore equilibrium like this. That is new equilibrium at P quarter. And we got these relations finally. And look at this. That is tariff case. That is same reasoning. PT, at PT, this condition satisfied. Here, at price of quarter, right? Automatically reach it to find new equilibrium. Anyway, the conclusion is almost same. Can you understand? That is import quota. Binding import quota will push up the domestic price of import because the quantity demanded will exceed the quantity supplied by home plus import supply. Okay? When a quota instead of tariff is used to restrict imports, the government receives no revenue. In this case, tariff case, government collect this amount of tariff, right? But here, no tariff, right? Just set maximum quantity, okay? So this money is not collected by government, actually. Then, who received this money? Instead, the revenue from selling imports at high price goes to quota license holders. The person, right? Anyway, that is import quantity, 70 quota, right? Usually domestic government issue import license to domestic people. For example, Association of Agricultural Farmers. Association of Agricultural Farmers can import Chilean grape, for example, like this, right? They sell at this price, P quota. But when this association import from overseas at this price, PW, world price. Okay? So license holders import foreign goods at PW and sell at this higher price at domestic consumers. Okay? So this one is appropriated by license holders, quota license holders. These extra revenues are called quota rents. We said that is now quota rents. That was tariff collection by government, right? But here, quota rents. Importing at PW, but sold at domestic consumers at P quota, right? This quota price, the price is domestic price, right? Domestic consumers price. And PW is importing price. Okay? That is quota rents. Import of sugar into the United States limited and quotarized passed out to foreign governments. The price of sugar in the U.S. has remained well above world price. U.S. consumers are hurt by more than U.S. producers benefit. Foreigners on quota rents. In the United States case, right? So quota license, foreign exporters has quota license. Then this quota rents are appropriated by foreign exporters. Okay? That is explained here. So that is sugar case. Sugar case is a U.S. example, so I'd like to skip this. So back to here. Anyway, we also use lots of this kind of thing. In Korean governments using this quota policy on lots of agricultural products, right? So now welfare analysis of quota. Here, that is A. This is A. This area is B. This rectangle is C. This area is E. Okay? And that is Q. That is quota. Quota is Q. Okay? quota is Q. Okay? Now think about welfare analysis. First, changing consumer surplus. Right? Consumer surplus. When free trade case, consumer surplus is this area, over price less than demand curve. But after quota, domestic price increase to this one. So new consumer surplus is this one. Okay? So when you move in introducing import quota, consumer surplus decrease by minus this area, isn't it? So minus A plus B plus C plus D. Change in producer surplus. When PW producer surplus is this area, now this area, right? Because domestic consumer price increase. So producer surplus is plus A, right? And now think about changing in quota range. We assume that domestic people have quota license, import Chilean pork grade with a cheaper price, for example, right? Then we said that quota range is the domestic one. That is plus C, isn't it? Right? Then changing national welfare is minus A plus A minus C plus C. So changing national welfare is minus B plus D. After introducing import quota, national welfare decrease. Right? Now think about the other case is quota range owned by foreign people. Then what happened? We have to reduce C, right? That is minus C, isn't it? Because foreign people occupy this quota range. Then national welfare changes minus B plus D minus E. That is a U.S. sugar case, isn't it? Anyway, national welfare decrease, definitely. Okay? Now we go next section. BR, voluntary export restraint. A voluntary export restraint works like an import quota, same to quota, except one point that the quota is imposed by exporting country rather than importing country. Okay? So in 1970s and 80s, United States introduced BR and iron and steel industry. Actually, based on ruling of the UR at that time, ruling on GATT system. So this kind of quota, import quota, is violation of some GATT rules. To evade this kind of thing, right? United States asked Japan or Korea exporting iron and steel to United States, right? So ask Korean government or Japanese government to reduce your exportation of iron and steel to United States market voluntarily. That is BER, simply talking. Okay? So mechanism is almost perfectly same to import quota. But who starts this kind of protection policy? By exporting countries or by importing countries? That is only one difference. Okay? The profit or rents from this policy are earned by foreign governments or foreign producers. So minus C, national welfare. That is minus definitely in the case of BER, because quota license, right, wholly appropriated by foreign. In that case, foreign countries exporting price is PQ, P quota, right? Domestic price is this one. Also, this is the exporting price in the case of BER. Foreign countries now export at this price, higher price than PW. And this one is occupied by themselves, right? The profit of rents from this policy are earned by foreign governments or foreign producers, foreign exporters, foreigners at a restricted quantity at an increased price. That is a result of BER, isn't it? Right? A voluntary export restraint in practice. In 1979, sharp oil price increase caused the U.S. market to shift abruptly towards smaller cars. Japanese producers moved to fill the increased demand faster than U.S. auto companies could come out with smaller, more fuel-efficient models. As the Japanese market share soared and the U.S. outperformed, strong political forces in the U.S. demanded protection. Rather than act unilaterally and risk creating a trade war, the U.S. government asked the Japanese government to limit your export. Same thing happened for Korean car exports to the United States, right? Japanese at the time, fearing unilateral U.S. protectionist measure if they did not do so, agreed to limit their sales. The first agreement in 1981 limited the Japanese export to U.S. to 1.68 million automobiles. A revision raised that total to blah, 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 blah. The price of Japanese car in the U.S. rose with the land captured by Japanese firms. So exporting that now, in BR case, that is exporting price. This quota range, right, appropriated by Japanese instead of U.S. people. Finally, we studied local content requirement. A local content requirement is a regulation that requires a specified fraction of a final good to be produced domestically. It may be specified in value terms by requiring that some minimum share of value of good represent home value added or physical unit. So you can understand after reading this one, but there is a famous example in Korean case. I remember from year 2000, before year 2000, right? Think about tobacco industry, tobacco production, tobacco industry, right? Only one government-supported national company. What's the name? KTNG? KTNG, for example, is sole seller in Korean cigarette market. Sole producers and sellers. Okay? But from year 2000, foreign production and sales to domestic market allowed. Right? So privatized from year 2000, tobacco industry privatized and liberalized. Can you understand? But shift to privatization and allowance of foreign production, Korean government introduced local content requirement. Right? If a foreign company, now BAT, for example, British American Tobacco, produce cigarette in Korea, they have to use, for example, 30% of Korean tobacco leaf. Korean tobacco leaf. Anyway, to produce cigarette, that is material to produce cigarette business. And Korean tobacco leaf is more expensive than Turkish one or foreign one. And quality is not so good. But Korean government introduced this kind of measure, for example. That is one example. Then, what happened? If foreign companies to produce cigarette in Korean territory, they have to use 30% of Korean leaf. Right? No other option. If they still want to produce a Korean territory and sell domestic market. Right? But the tobacco leaf price, Korean price is higher, low quality than others, for example. Anyway, they use Korean tobacco leaf. That is a local content requirement regulation. That is protectionist policy, isn't it? If foreign company produce cigarette using foreign tobacco leaf, they can sell high quality cigarette at cheaper price. Right? But because of this local content regulation, their opportunity to do that is minimized, and Korean tobacco leaf farmers, right, have some benefit from this. Protected, actually. protection happen in Korean tobacco industry. Okay, that is local content requirement. So now read this slide again. A local content requirement is regulation that requires a specified fraction of a final good to be produced domestically. For example, the use of Korean tobacco leaf. It may be specified in value terms by requiring that some minimum share of value of a good represent home value added or physical unit. Okay? From the viewpoint of domestic producers of import, for example, tobacco leaf farmers, a local content requirement provides protection in the same way that import quota would. That is protectionist measure, simply talking. From the viewpoint of firms that must purchase Korean tobacco leaf, however, the requirements does not place a strictly limit on import. If they want to produce more, they can use more tobacco leaf. Only share matter, but allows firms to import more if they allow use more home pass. Okay? They can produce more. They can use more 4-in-1. Also, they can use more Korean tobacco leaf. Then their total production and sales can increase. Right? In that sense, not so stringent compared to import quota. That is the point of this slide. Local content requirement provides neither government revenue nor quota rents. Instead, the difference between the price of home goods and imports is averaged into the price of final good, final cigarette, and is passed on consumers. Okay? Any public work project funded by American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, ARRA, must use U.S. iron and steel and manufactured goods, right? Unless foreign bid more than 25% lower. The Bay Bridge ranking San Francisco and Oakland did not use ARRA funding because some key components would have been 23% more expensive. Delays due to having to show that some of its items are unavailable from U.S. sources has triggered this protectionist course that shut U.S. firms out of opportunity abroad. Okay? So that is related to this one, government procurement, right? Then what is government procurement? Government expenditure in macroeconomics, you studied y equals c plus I plus g plus x minus m like this, right? What is c? Consumption, consumers' demand, consumption by private sector, household, right? And what is g? Government is spending, right? Government consumption. So public procurement is related to this government spending. Usually, most governments, right, use domestically produced goods and services, right? But sometimes, for example, government procure ballpoint pen. Domestically produced ballpoint pen is $30 per unit, right? Same thing is $20 per unit when this one is imported from China, right? But usually, government expenditures relate to domestic goods and services, so higher price than the other, than imported, right? So why government have to procure from domestic source instead of import source? That is really important thing because government consumption share also increasing trend in labor value, right? So but most of government use domestic supplied one only. That is protectionist measure. Can you understand? That is public procurement issue. So year 2000, I think is year 2002, Korea and Japan discuss about FTA between two economies. One reason why the FTA talk stopped at the time was this one, public procurement. So in Japan, Japanese governments at that time builds lots of offices and buildings, right? Public buildings and public offices like this. But at the time, Japan only allow domestic bidders, constructors bidders, and exclude foreign one. But Korean, at the time, Korean construction companies are more efficient than Japanese one. So at the time, Korean government asked that give us a chance, give domestic companies a chance to bid this public building construction at Japanese procurement market, right? But at the time, Japan do not accept this one, right? That is one reason of break of appetite between two countries. Not main reason, but anyway, third reason. Okay. Anyway, other trade policies, export credit subsidies, a subsidized loan to exporters. Export credit subsidies is this one, subsidized loan to exporters, right? So U.S. government use lots of some money to agricultural exporters, for example, right? That is credit subsidies, export credit subsidies. U.S. Export-Import Bank subsidized loan to U.S. exporters. And the government procurement, I already explained. Government agencies are obligated to purchase from home suppliers even when they charge a higher price compared to foreign suppliers. Right? This is a protectionist measure. Okay? And bureaucratic regulation, red tape, safety, health, quality, or customs or regulation can act as a form of protection and trade restriction. So this kind of is very infamous in Chinese customs, right? So Korean companies want to export something. That is, I think, about 2 weeks is enough. But they say Korean exporting products maybe have some safety and health and quality problems. So we have to explore more in laboratory, national laboratory in China, and 2 months passed, for example. That is also protectionist policy. Okay? The effects of trade policy. For each trade policy, the price rising in countries adopting the policy. Home producers supply more and gain. Inefficient domestic producers are winners. Consumers are losers. All types of protectionist policy, tariff to bureaucratic regulation. The world price falls when home is a large country that affects world prices. Tariff generate government revenue, export subsidy draining, right? Import quota do not affect government revenue. All this trade policy create production and consumption distortion. Okay? The others are just summary. Table 9.1 is summary of protectionist policies such as tariff, export subsidy, import quota, and BER. Right? Okay, I'd like to stop here. Chapter 9, finish it.